Hello there, and welcome to this live demo of VeloAI. I'm Leon Lodewijks, CTO at Inspire Testing, and with me on the call I have Ben. He's going to be running the demo for us today. So Ben is one of our principal consultants. I'm sure everyone is very interested to actually see Velo, but before that, I just want to set a bit of context and maybe give you some background around Velo. So it must be 6 to 8 months ago, where AI was really starting to gain traction, and we felt that there were AI tools for testers and testing, but none that necessarily addressed the pain points that we were seeing. So one of the problems was the fact that developers had AI sort of natively there in their IDEs, things like Copilot and so forth, make it very easy for developers to embrace AI and start churning out more code more quickly. But for testers, we didn't necessarily have something like that. The testing tools that are out there to this day still, they don't necessarily integrate into the IDE so well. And we started sort of seeing a bit of a bottleneck with developers churning out more code, testing still being stuck in sort of the old way of doing things and not necessarily making use of the efficiencies that AI could bring. So we started looking at developing a testing copilot, and you'll probably hear that word quite often today, testing copilot. So we could have gone down the route of creating something which is automated and there's a press of a button and it does all of the work for you, but we purposefully didn't go down that route. We wanted to develop something which could guide a person in quality through the SDLC. So you'll see once Ben starts showing the demo, there is a very structured work stream that you go through, and you don't have to follow that, but it's a bit of a guide. So we're very excited about Velo. It's the purpose is not to replace a tester at all. The purpose is to be a co-pilot, bring efficiencies, and bring all of the good benefits of AI. We are going to run the risk of the demo gods today by doing a live demo. It's always a bit of a risk, but hopefully everything goes well. So enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to Ben, who can start showing you Velo. We are going to take questions in the chat, so we'll probably answer those at the end, and then at the end I'll also just share a link with you where you'll be able to sign up for a free 2-week trial on Velo. So yes, let's see whether you're as excited about this as we are. Ben, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Leon. And yeah, let's dive straight into it. Looking at the dashboard here of VeloAI. I think Leon's done a really good job of actually prefacing what it is. Velo is a co-pilot. It's a workbench. And I think really quickly, just sort of divulging what it isn't. It's not going to be your source of truth. It's not going to be a test management tool. It's not a CI/CD pipeline. It is a workbench and a co-pilot that's here to go ahead and actually enable your testers, augment them, and empower them to close the deltas that Leon mentioned that were created by AI entering that development space. You'll see here on the Velo dashboard, you've got your testing workflow. And like you said, it's really designed to integrate naturally into your flow and allow you to actually be empowered and speed up what you're actually delivering. You've got your requirements validator starting very early in the process, even before the QAs might be getting involved. You would have people like your BAs using this module. Then moving into your test scenario design module, naturally into your test case creation, and then later on automation development. We've also got some other modules here like coverage optimization and unit test generators. For those of us that are using it for the first time and make it to the dashboard, but you can't quite remember everything that was said in the demo, if you need, and you're not quite sure what your requirements validator is going to do, you can click into the Learn More button and actually get a really useful set of information here. It's going to walk you through how it's used, what it's used for, and what outputs it's going to be giving you. But without further ado, let's jump into the first of what I'm going to call the big four, the requirements validator. So I'll be pasting in a pretty basic requirement here. We can look at it really quickly. The description is that the system must allow merchants to process payments from customers across various payment channels, including mobile money, credit, debit cards, direct bank transfers within a transaction time of less than 5 seconds. And you'll see as well, we've also added in some basic acceptance criteria, about 5 of them. And what Velo is going to do is it's going to take this requirement, analyze it against industry best practice and inspired testing best practices, and come back with a set of results against some metrics that we'll be looking at together in a second. It's also going to intelligently separate out your acceptance criteria from your description, and actually show, you can see here the loading bar saying validating 5 acceptance criteria. So it's already separated it out, identified that there's 5 different ones. You can see on the left here as well, we've got something called domain selection. For those of you that are in specific domains and know it ahead of time, you can let Velo know what it's going to be, but you don't necessarily have to. Auto detect will do that work for you, and it'll let you know sort of what domain it thinks you're working in if you haven't already specified. So down below, you'll see we've got the dashboard, and you're going to get your overall score. The metrics that it's measuring against we'll look at now once we go into the requirements themselves. But overall, you're looking at about a 70% in the requirements themselves, but a 50 in the acceptance criteria, implying that there's some vagueness, some missing information. Overall, our completeness is sitting at a 0 out of 1, and it's already identified 5 issues. On the right, you'll see top recommendations. It's going to give you some quick fixes and things to jump into immediately before sort of taking a deeper dive, moving through these tabs at the top here. So we'll jump into the requirements, and you'll see if I had given it more than 1 requirement, there would be a longer list, but obviously I gave it 1, so it's only going to show us 1. We can expand that and we can look at what metrics it's measuring against now. We've got things like clarity, testability, completeness, and implementation readiness. Overall scoring for each one, our completeness and implementation readiness being what's actually pulling us down in this scenario. It's going to identify what issues it sees, whether they're non-functional, functional, or even just technical issues, and give some recommendations down below. Along with that, you can see that it's already identified your individual acceptance criteria, and it's already showing what issues it's seen. But in the later tabs, it'll take a much deeper dive into that. And at the bottom, you can see through the auto domain analysis, it's already identified that this should be more or less in the financial domain. So now we can go ahead and jump into our acceptance criteria analysis. So requirement 1, sort of looking at one of the 5 acceptance criteria that is generated. Again, same metrics: clarity, testability, completeness, and implementation readiness. Overall, we knew that the acceptance criteria would be much lower. It's done the same thing, identified issues, given some recommendations, and also given you some coverage analysis, showing things like positive scenarios and negative scenarios not being covered, as well as potential performance criteria that could have been looked at as well. And then at the bottom, it's got some coverage gaps that it's noticed. And it'll go ahead and do that for every single acceptance criteria that you get. Then from this point, you'll go into the improvement tab. And at this point, it's up to the integrity of your engineer that's using Velo to make sure that the improvements are relevant and what they want to be seeing. So at the bottom here, what you'll see is that we've got functional requirements, non-functional requirements, acceptance criteria, improvements, and compliance considerations. And in one of our earlier demos, we had some guys come in and they were looking, and funnily enough, we got to this point and we were talking about sort of the improved requirements, and they said, okay, but we don't want non-functional. And it is at this point that your engineer needs to know that and edit it appropriately. So if I didn't want this non-functional requirement, or I didn't want it to be assessing it as such, I would delete it at this point before moving forward. But assuming that for the purpose of this demo, we're happy with the improved requirements, we'll go ahead and generate those improved requirements going forward. You'll see here as well that we've got a format option. We're going to have a standard format. It also adheres to BDD, and you can also use user stories. But for the purpose of our demo, we'll be going with standard. Once generated, what you're going to see is down below, this is called the Explorer. And if you were watching close enough, you would have seen that the requirements tab on our Explorer has lit up with a little bit of orange and sort of gained some color. And we can see our refined requirements here at the end in the final sort of tab of this requirements quality analysis module. Each individual acceptance criteria being outlined and our improved requirement being shown here at the top. The reason that I pointed out our Explorer is that now we can also access it from here as we move through the remaining modules. But a quick pause here to talk about what clients and people seeing this for the first time would often ask at this point is, they've often said to me, Ben, that's great. So exciting that you can push a requirement into an LLM and get a response back. How does that help me, right? I can do that on chat. I can go to Gemini. There's lots of LLMs that I can push these through. And the answer to that question, Velo's answer to that question, would be global context. So global context is what's going to make Velo stand out among other LLMs and sort of AI options when looking at testing. If you treat it like a person, the more information you give it, the more it'll be able to give you back. And the thing that you'll be able to do here in the global context is actually give it context around your business, whether it be business context, technical constraints, or even assumptions that you're working under. Putting it into your global context will allow Velo to consult this during any level of response going forward. You can also upload things like diagrams and documents to be intelligently interpreted and taken into consideration when returning answers to you later. That being said, the next question that people ask is, great, so you can make it personal to me, but now I've given all of my information to an LLM, and I don't want you learning on our business models and all of that information. And Velo's answer to that is that it is session-based and not stored anywhere. So in fact, none of your information is being learned on or trained on, but it is now up to you to export and import your context. If I were to refresh, log out, or close my tab, I would lose any of the global context that I've generated or any artifacts that I've generated as well. So we've left the management of that security side of things to the users so that they can now store their content wherever it is that they feel most safe and import it as necessary. That also allows for multiple users to be operating on the same global context. So should you have one particular engineer that has built out an incredible global context that's allowing Velo to truly understand what your context is and how to best move forward, you can now share that global context around, and everyone's working from the same base point, and Velo's understanding from the same point going forward. And yeah, I think that speaks well into what makes it tailored and how it's still safe to be used, even though you might be sort of potentially uploading more sensitive information. That being said, I think we can jump into our next module, being the test scenario design module. So at this point, like I said earlier, we've seen that our requirements have been highlighted at the bottom. What you could do at this point is select an entire requirement or just one acceptance criteria to then be selected and pushed into our test scenario design text field. For the sake of our demo, I'm just going to be using one acceptance criteria. The more information you put in, the more information you'll get out. That being said, the more you give it, the longer it will take. Early on, we put some information into one of these during one of the demos, and one of the guys said, why is it taking so long? And then we got something close to 30 test scenarios out. And it's just funny because in these scenarios, you click a button and you expect it to come back in 10 seconds because we're so used to that type of thing. But if you think about the quantity of the work and the quality of the work versus what it would have been someone doing it without that AI assistance, the time it would have taken would have been days versus the 30 to 50 seconds that it takes to generate a set of test scenarios based on your requirement or acceptance criteria. The test scenarios and test design are also based on industry best practice, as I've said before, inspired testing best practices. We use ISTQB as a benchmark, and we're also adhering to multiple security standards at the same time. So yeah, Velo is definitely using sort of the best approach to generate these test scenarios. You'll see here below for this one test scenario, not even one requirement, but actually one acceptance criteria under that requirement. We built out 24 test scenarios. We can go ahead and look at a couple of them. You'll see some of them are going to be functional. If you go a little bit lower, you might see some non-functional tests coming in, like performance testing. And again, this is the point at which your engineer's integrity comes into play, where if you're not looking into things like performance testing or security testing yet, then it is up to you what you take forward. Similarly to the earlier point, in one of our demos, they looked at that and said, okay, but I don't want non-functional. And we just said, that's good that you know what you want. Don't take it forward, and you can use whatever is most relevant. Because again, it's not your source of truth, and it's not telling you what to do. It's giving you suggestions. It's a workbench and a co-pilot. It's here to help you and speed you up, not to take your job or do it for you. You can also sort of filter it up here by things like priority, risk, or just order in which it was generated based on Velo's understanding of how things have been created. That being said, you'll see that at the bottom in our Explorer, our scenario is now lit up, and we can move into our next natural space, that being the test case creation. Again, I'm just going to grab the top of the options that we've generated, load it in here, go ahead and generate these test cases. You'll see again, there's a few different options. You've got your standard test case format, BDD test case format, and API test case format. Now, quickly worth mentioning is for anyone that's done manual testing in the API space, I'm sure we'll all be quite familiar with Postman. What's quite exciting about the way that Velo will generate those API test case formatted test cases is that if you do choose the API option, it'll not only generate them for you, but give you the option to export a Postman collection to then be directly imported into Postman, which for me personally, as someone that has worked with Postman, was quite an exciting added feature. And I'm sure for all of those that have worked with it is quite exciting in general. I think it will require you to upload a Swagger document, but that can generally be gotten. And if you have worked with Postman, you'll sort of know where to find it. So from this one test scenario, of the 24 that were generated, we're going to get a set. And you'll see now that, again, if we're talking about time that it takes after clicking that orange button versus the time it would have taken a single test engineer without this level of assistance, it really is increasing that velocity, being obviously short for, or Velo being short for velocity. I think also really quickly, while we're still waiting for this, we can look here on the left. You'll see the credits option. Per user, you're looking at about 300 credits a month. And it's more of a metric to be tracked than something used to limit people or sort of limit access to the tokens. In the early days of implementing it, we had the limit set to around 150, and people were getting close, not quite getting there, but getting close. And we decided to push it up to 300 just to make it so that people really weren't going to get there unless they were trying to build out 20,000 test cases for no reason at all. But what it is for more than just sort of setting that limit is to allow us to track what modules are being used by who and where. And that's something that your admin users will be able to see and understand in terms of where your team is in using Velo and how far along they are through the process. So you'll see here that we've built out 21 test cases out of the one test scenario of 24 test scenarios that we've built. So you're already seeing this level of quantity coming out of one sort of hastily made test requirement at the beginning, which became a much more complex requirement, into 24 scenarios, and of 21 test cases. So this level of quantity is really going to help us sort of close that delta. What you'll also notice, an added benefit of using Velo between your engineers, is what you'll end up getting is a standardization of your test case formatting. And over time, sort of building out a readability that people will understand across your organization, and just allowing, again, for that standardization and increasing readability over time. You'll also see Velo is going to be giving you out suggestions for test data based on what is understood and the test cases being pushed through it. At this point, I think we can jump into our next scenario, or our next module, being the automation development module. Me personally, this is my favorite module of Velo. I think it's really exciting, and having a test automation background, it's just really awesome to see what AI is allowing us to do. Before this sort of generates, we can just have a look at what's available to us. We've got sort of the big 4 programming languages here, as well as PHP. We've got a bit of a running joke within the demos saying, please don't judge us for having that in there. But I think it actually speaks well to Velo's ability to be customized to client experiences or client needs. We had one person coming in, or one organization coming in, of the sort of many that were saying, we were really interested in Velo, but only work in PHP. Can we help? And the Velo team was immediately interested in making that work for them. And they added PHP along with their automation framework of Codeception, just speaking to Velo's customizability per client. You'll also notice, or sort of once it's done generating, we'll just skip through or jump through each language, and you'll see that it changes automation frameworks appropriately. Things like rest assured. If we were on C#, you would see rest sharp. If we were on Python, you would see something like robot framework. And then before we jump into the actual code that it's generated, you'll see here we've got something that allows you to put in a target URL. Velo can actually, if access is allowed for Velo, it can go to that URL ahead of time, scrape the DOM, and intelligently understand what the most relevant buttons for your test are, and then return locators for those buttons. This, again, is just bringing so much more value to your automation engineer. Even if that locator is off by a little bit, you're starting with a skeleton of a test that is significantly further along than if someone just handed you a test case and said, automate for me. So yeah, we can jump down now and actually look at the code that it's generated. You'll see at the bottom, we've got our feature file opened up. We've got our page object model in play. We've got a homepage.java here, setting up your drivers and navigating to it. You've got a login page, also some spaces for things like locators. Again, if it had a URL, it would go and scrape it, but handing this to your automation engineer is going to be so much quicker for them than starting from a blank sort of project. You've also got something in here for mobile money payment page. And we'll actually jump into the tests themselves. We've got a runners class. We've got step definitions. We've got a driver factory here, where your setup and teardown will be happening. A hooks class. And then down below, we've got our actual feature file here, wherein the test has been created, data is being pushed through. Again, just super powerful. And bringing your manual testers potentially one step closer to your automation team, in that they could get this level of code and hand it over to your automation engineers and start them from a much more advanced point than just handing them those test cases. You'll see at the bottom here as well, we've got something called integration options, where you can enable it. And what this does is it actually allows you to upload existing files from your automation framework for Velo to interpret and include when writing your test cases. I found this super exciting when I first used it, because I gave it a whole bunch of code from one of my automation frameworks. And instead of just giving me a few new files to sort of add to the framework, it appended to existing files, adding tests to my test case file, adding feature steps, or adding steps to my test step files, adding feature files as per needed. But just really exciting to see what Velo is able to do the more information you give it. And from this point, let's quickly look here. You can see the other languages, C#, then bringing in things like REST Sharp, TypeScript, allowing you to use Cypress and Playwright, Python, you'll see your robot framework here at the bottom, and PHP using Codeception. But yeah, I think that sort of outlines the top, or the big four, what I'm going to call the big four within Velo. And now we're just going to sort of quickly peruse through a couple of the other modules that are bringing a lot of value to our clients going forward. We've got one called the coverage optimization model. And what this is going to do, you put your requirements on the left, existing test cases on the right, and it's going to give you an overall understanding of where your gaps are, so that you might be able to actually increase coverage by looking at what Velo sort of recommends you to do going forward. Next up, we've got our unit test generator. Now, a lot of the devs that see this, they smile and say, that's all good and well, but I've got a unit test generator that's already integrated into my IDE. I don't need to go to a website for it. But I think that there's power in Velo's unit test generator, in that it's a shift left approach to unit test generation. You put your source code at the top, requirements and test scenarios that are relevant to that source code, and then it'll generate you some unit tests based on requirements and test scenarios. I'm sure many of us have heard before that often when writing code, a developer might write unit tests that are written to test the code to see that it does what it was written to do, and not what it was intended to do by the requirements. So your unit test generator within Velo is actually going to shift us left in that direction and allow for your unit tests to be much more closely aligned with your requirements and test scenarios versus the usual that you might be getting, or the usual issues that you might be getting within those unit test generators. Then at the bottom, very similarly to the other coverage optimization module, you've got a unit test coverage analyzer. And similarly, you give it the source code, unit tests, and requirements, and it's going to tell you where your gaps are, and whether or not it'll actually be able to point out whether or not you've got that usual sort of issue wherein you're testing the code to see that it does what it was written to do versus what the requirements had intended. Now we can sort of quickly talk about integrations. VeloAI does integrate quite natively with Jira and Azure, allowing you to upload and download from your Azure and Jira instances your existing test cases, test case creation, test scenarios. And it just allows for that sort of quicker interaction for people that are now finishing up and have created all of these test cases and want to load it into their Jira instance. You can do that straight from Velo. What you can't do, again, it's not going to let you push code straight into your CI/CD pipeline. It's, again, supposed to be a part of the process. So at this point, you're expected to take your test cases, run them against your instance. Take your automation, run it against your instance. Make sure that it works the way you want it to work before you actually push it into CI/CD pipelines and things like that. And then for those of us that are using things outside of Jira and Azure, you can export all of your artifacts directly into Excel using CSVs, just allowing, again, for sort of different options when people are using things, if not Jira and Azure. You'll see the admin dashboard here at the bottom as well. Was in the beginning, I spoke about our tokens. Your admin dashboard is just going to allow you to actually look at the usage of each token and see where your users are getting the most value out of Velo. In the beginning, we spoke about global context, and you need to export and import. Down at the bottom here, you'll see something called Save Store Snapshot or Restore Store Snapshot. Down here is where you will be saving your artifacts for later use. So I've built out all of this information in my requirements, my scenarios, my test cases, and my code. If I don't want to lose this when I refresh or close the tab or log out, I need to save it, because, again, Velo is intentionally session-based, just to get around the security issues of people having sort of potentially sensitive information within Velo. So it's up to your engineers to manage those artifacts, but it also allows to share. So should I have another engineer that needs to continue from where I'm leaving off here, I can save that snapshot, send it over to them, and they have exactly what I generated over on their side, allowing them to continue from where I left off. Down the bottom here as well, you'll see something that allows you to manage your artifacts. So should you have some test scenarios in here that you weren't quite happy with, you can enable editing and actually change them as appropriate. If, let's say, you didn't like the first one, you could delete it. The second one, a couple of these words weren't quite right, get rid of them. Or maybe some of your test data didn't fit in your test cases. You can go ahead and edit that all here in your artifact management module. And I think that brings us to a good place to sort of wrap up the demo, unless, Leon, you can think of some things that you want me to look at still.
No, I think that's good, Ben. Thanks. Let's actually look at some of the questions. I think Jan has been on the side trying to answer a lot of those questions. Corin, maybe if you can just put in the chat any questions that maybe we've not answered yet. Okay, so Jean-Pierre is asking whether VeloAI can integrate into TestRail. Jean-Pierre, not at the moment. It's certainly something that we can put on the backlog. What we've tried to do is integrate most of the popular frameworks and both languages and automation frameworks or test frameworks, but it's not a big deal for us to add something in custom. In fact, I think where we are now, based on where we started, we've had a lot of enhancements based on feedback and customer feedback. So if there's a use case for TestRail and if that's going to benefit everyone, which I believe it will, then that's a possibility for us to do that. Okay, I'm just going to scan through the list and just see whether there are any others we've not answered. I saw Yusuf asked earlier how we cater for multiple users using the global context. So I think Ben did answer that to some degree in that he said that there's an import and export feature in the global context. So our thinking is that if you're working on a specific project, you will have a project-specific global context file. So if you're a project team, there's a global context file that can be shared amongst the team members working on that project. It can obviously be updated by different people. And then every time that you start using Velo or open Velo, you will import that global context file. I just want to touch on the fact that we don't store or save any data. Now, that is 100% by design. Data, obviously GDPR, POPIA, all sorts of other EU regulations as well around data makes it very important for us to not store data. So everything is session-based. Literally, the minute you refresh a page or you kill your browser, then there is nothing that we've retained. We integrate with OpenAI in the background. We're on an enterprise plan, which means that OpenAI assures us that they don't use any of the data that you put into Velo to train any of their models, which is also very important. And then the other thing I just want to mention as well is the stock standard implementation of Velo will be a web app that you access over the internet. Some of the bigger enterprise organizations, especially the banks, they might not like that. So we've actually outlined quite a few different deployment options. So there are options in terms of fully deploying Velo as well as everything associated with Velo into a client's ecosystem. At the moment, we host Velo in a private Azure tenant, and all of the security around it has been considered. So there's been an independent security test, penetration test of Velo as well. So we've incorporated all of that feedback as well. But we've tried to create different deployment options depending on sort of the security team regulations and the architecture team at different clients to try and cater to those needs. Okay, so Yusuf, I see you're asking about the credits. So at the moment, I just want to correct Ben. So it's not 300 Velo credits, it's 250. We actually manage that at an enterprise level. So let's assume that both Ben and I work at, I don't know, Old Mutual. We will each be allocated 250 credits, but actually we track that at a global level, at an enterprise level. So we would collectively have 500 credits at the enterprise level, if Ben is a really heavy user and I'm a very light user, he won't be penalized by using Velo, which is ultimately what we want. So although you're allocated 250 Velo credits per person, it's actually at a global level, and certain people that use it more can use it more, and others less, obviously. I see Jan's just answered that as well. Well, I'm not 100% sure when you ask about the domains. I'm not sure whether that relates to the requirements validator where you have those domains on there on the drop down. Ben, maybe you can just, I'm going to reshare. Maybe you can just go back there and just show what's on that drop down, if that's your question, Will.
Yeah, you've got generic, financial, healthcare, e-commerce, industrial, manufacturing, construction, workforce, utilities, things like water and energy, Internet of Things or embedded systems, and then government or public sector.
Okay, awesome. Then I also see Katie has asked a question around how VeloAI handles requirements changes, especially during UAT phases. So again, Velo is a workbench. It's a co-pilot. It's never the single source of truth. So the idea would be, once you get into UAT, potentially run your requirements through Velo again, if there have been updates to that, and just incorporate the new feedback into your UAT testing phase. We never want this to take away from a tester's the capabilities that a tester brings from a human perspective. So apply your testing knowledge, apply your experience to actually critically look at what Velo is giving you, and then decide what's relevant and what's not relevant. The last thing we would want with Velo is for people to copy and paste. So take the entire input and just use that. The idea would be generate Velo, use it as your almost as your testing soundboard, where you come up with your own tests and compare to what Velo has come up with, and then sort of decide what's relevant and what isn't. Okay, I'm just going to read through one more question here. Thanks, Dan. I see that was just a positive comment. Okay, I think we've run through all the questions, if I'm not mistaken. Hopefully, we've not missed any. I think Jan has done a very good job in the background answering the questions as we've gone along. So we are offering a 2-week free trial for anyone. I'm going to show the QR code on the screen. So if you scan this QR code, it's going to allow you to register for Velo. It will give you ample VeloAI credits to be able to test and trial to your heart's content. The QR code will take you to a registration page. So if you sign up there, you'll gain access to Velo straight away, and we'd be very, very eager to see and understand the feedback. We're obviously very biased, thinking that Velo is a massive value add and should be a tool that brings a lot of efficiency to your process. Velo, like Ben alluded to, is short for velocity, because that's what we ultimately want Velo to bring to the quality process, velocity. But if you have any feedback, I mean, please let us know. We incorporate that feedback. We use it to mature the tool. I think we've got something which is good at the moment, but it can always improve.
Yeah. I see there's a question here from Peter Badenhorst here. It says, can we add our existing automation test project to the global context to assist with the test generation, or is the global context limited to documentation only? I can answer this one. So yes, global context doesn't take your automation framework specifically, but in the automation development module, there is a place to upload most relevant automation files for Velo to take into consideration when building out your automation. So yes, you can upload your automation test project, just not in the global context, upload it at the automation development module level.
Peter's question is a good one, and I just want to reiterate this one if people on the stream have not seen it. So he was asking whether Velo can be used to reverse engineer requirements from an existing project. It's not something that we considered initially, but it can definitely do that. So you can actually paste existing project test cases, scenarios, automation code, even you can paste that into Velo, and it will actually produce requirements based on that. So a bit of a use case we never considered, but definitely a use case that seems to have gained a bit of traction. Okay, I think we've got through all the questions. If there are any other questions which we may have missed, then I apologize in advance, but please feel free to put it in the comments of the stream, and we'll definitely answer it afterwards. Hopefully everyone can access the trial version of Velo, and yes, we look forward to your feedback, and thank you very much for your time. I know it's difficult getting people to spend, 45 minutes on a webinar, so very appreciative. And yes, everyone, I wish you a great rest of the day, and Ben, thanks for running that demo, and we'll talk again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, guys.